Thank you for joining, Irena. This is another episode of Dead Serious, where we don't take death seriously and we talk about everything in between. So, Irena, like I said, I went down a complete deep rabbit hole on your Instagram channel, and I just found your content completely fascinating. And it's definitely a corner of earth and death that we don't really talk about, which is the consciousness factor of it and stripping away the fear of it by understanding the spirituality, the truth, and all of these explanations. So I'm going to try to do a good job on explaining who you are, but please fill it in. So you are a medium, a conscious researcher, and an advanced dowsing practitioner. I didn't even know what a dowsing rod was before, but your public positioning is around sovereignty, truth, consciousness expansion, and psychic abilities. And I would love for you to just share, how did you get into, the sector of work?
I think that any person that does what I do, we have a very interesting story, a weird story from childhood all the way up. I love it. I love the uniqueness of it, but I don't think I'm special in any way. In fact, I think that what I'm tapping into is what all humans can potentially tap into. And that's what I like to focus on. So I don't believe in the concepts of chosen people and like, I have a gift. I'm like, well, I'm tapped into something. So this must mean it's possible, right? And if I'm not the only person doing this and there's other people doing this, how do we all do this? And is this part of human evolution? So my mediumship probably started about 20 years ago. I would say that there were definitely fragments throughout my childhood where I was experiencing ESP. And I thought that what I was experiencing was normal. And it really took a while for me, honestly, up until a few years ago, where I was like, whoa, what I'm experiencing is actually not what other people are experiencing. My awareness of things is not what other people are experiencing. Even people who were claiming to be, oh, I'm spiritual, or I can do this and that, it was very, very different. And so that's something that I've just learned to embrace now. But it took many, many years for me to even accept myself and to not dim myself down in any way to cater to fear narratives that existed in the world or people's perspectives or taboos on what I was experiencing. Because I think what I'm experiencing and what mediumship really is, or connecting with other dimensions, I really just think it's part of humanity being part of a multidimensional reality that they don't really understand yet. And so I'm a little bit of a fire horse. I don't really cater to other people's egos very much. I'm a very, very direct individual, and that can scare a lot of individuals. But I can tell you that most real spiritual teachers are like this in many ways. You get your nurturing types, and then you get the ones that just want to cut through all the fakery and the illusion of this reality and go, all right, what is this? What is this about? Let's not tiptoe around this. Let's get to the empowerment part, because clearly we're existing in a world that's very manipulated with many manipulated systems. And we're just coming to a breaking point in the human timeline. And that's where I was like, okay, it's time for me to come up now. This is where I come out and talk. And this is where whatever I offer, my energy, my personality, this is where it's going to start to play its role for whatever reason. We're all here for a reason. Again, I'm not here for some special reason. We're all contributing to whatever this is.
Absolutely. I mean, thank you so much. I think, this is a really good segue, because you talked about multidimensionality. Can you just expand? What does that mean exactly for those that don't know?
Okay, so when I say multidimensional reality, I'm really referring to whatever this construct is that we're in, and that it is more than what a linear human perception might perceive this all as. It's something that I personally support a simulation theory, the holographic universe, the quantum perspectives of sciences. I support those because that's what I'm accessing in my own mediumship. So that for me is proven from what I'm experiencing and what I know other people experience. And I think it makes sense. I think that quantum sciences are probably the future of humanity. I think that we're more than what we are. And that's why I was excited about talking about death, to be honest, because the stigma, like, let's talk about it, because it's something that people are scared of until they die. That's it. They spend the whole life fearing it, and then it happens anyway.
Absolutely. Okay. I'm just so excited. I have so many questions. I'm trying to frame which one to go in first, but maybe we just stay a little bit longer on the quantum science of it. And then we're going to go dive straight into death and tons of topics around there. So I know that there is a simulation theory, which I'm 100% on board with as well. There's organic versus digital simulation,
Yes.
right? Is this a concept that you can kind of expand a little bit more into?
So the virtual component that you're talking about, that is, I would say, well, you could break that down into two ways. You've got the synthetic perspectives of it, but then you've also got the lower dimensional physical manifestation. And I think the digital is just a lower dimensional human perception of what it is. But I do think that the simulation, it's an organic simulation. So meaning it's using it's constructed of synthetic frequencies and vibrations, and not in the way that humans think a simulation is, because they automatically think it's like virtual or digital, because that's what we understand simulations are. I'm talking about something that it's so multifaceted, so complex, that is living, that is an advanced or superior form of consciousness. Yeah.
Totally. Because, the reason why it took me so long to subscribe to the simulation theory is that, because I believe in God, source, and whatever that entity is, that it's sort of like that we're oneness of. And for me to understand simulation, there's this stigma around a game and a simulation versus just this complexity that I'm just starting to kind of grasp the just like the tip of it. Right. And there's also the elements of free will and fate. I'm still trying to understand, this overall experience. So, yeah.
Well, talking about, since you mentioned free will, I do want to touch on that, because that's such an important, I think even if you dive into the spiritual, whatever, spiritual path you really go into, it's free will is just one of those important concepts of any spirituality. And from what I understand now, and mind you, I don't think anyone is ever going to understand everything from the human experience, because you're viewing it from a tiny box, and it's just not going to make sense to your tiny, human brain. That's just how it is for us right now. But again, I want to learn how we can expand on it. But there's just so much more to free will and that topic. And I think that we do have free will, but to a certain extent. And some people get scared of that. But I think that if we're an extension of some sort of energy source, like you were saying, or power source, or ultimate power source of consciousness, whatever it is, right? Because obviously everything in existence needs to run off some sort of power system, right?
Yeah.
Right. And that's what we really are, in my opinion. And so it's got the system, you could say that everything's running off is that simulation. But how far can we go with free will, right? Do we have free will here with our daily life? Yes. Do we have free will on a much larger collective or cosmic level? I think we might have certain limitations. But again, I don't want to use limitations in a negative way. I think it's more about that we're part of something bigger evolving. That's what I mean, where we might have limitations to our free will, because it's just much bigger than us, and we're part of some other larger cycle and larger collective cycles. And it's exciting, but it's also like, okay, so, and then you go further down the rabbit hole. But it's just a fascinating topic, free will.
Fascinating. I think, maybe I smell episode number 2 with you, but we'll park that. So what I would love to dive into is the before death, after death, and then just the overall all-encompassing soul, spiritual side of death, and what we'll touch also on near-death experiences, if we can shed some light around that. So around before death, right? I'm sure you've heard of the 21-gram theory, which is when a body passes away, you become automatically 21 grams lighter. And a lot of times people associate that with the soul leaving. And I want to hear if you have anything to share about that, just to kind of give it a little bit more.
So I didn't actually specifically know of that theory, but similar ones, which they're very similar, but they don't use that specific analogy. So from what I have experienced in my own mediumship is that before people pass away, mostly I'm going to base this on older age. Okay. Because that's predominantly how people are passing away, right? Is from being elderly. And those people, from what I've experienced, will start to leave before they actually physically die. That is something I have explained to people before. And that's something I started experiencing within probably the past decade. But yeah, again, more with elderly people, where I was almost being told that they were making plans, even up to like a year, more than a year in advance of actually leaving. But something was happening on a multidimensional level that I didn't know how to explain to people, but I knew that they were going to pass away soon. That's a real thing. So that makes sense how you were saying, oh, they get lighter, because
Yeah.
there's some sort of exchange happening, basically, where the
Huh.
soul is communicating with an aspect of itself, right? Maybe a higher fractal of itself or its oversoul, where something's already being initiated, whether I don't know, soul contracts. Look, I'm not huge on the whole soul contract thing, but I do understand that it's a possible concept here, but it's probably a little bit more complex than what we understand as a, contract. But yeah, something basically happens before they pass away. And it can be, again, up to, a year or so. And then obviously when you get much closer to the death, you see them, right? They're communicating. They can see angels, ancestors, family members, pets. There's some sort of like integration where they're merged with another. You can see that they're like transitioning into another dimension of consciousness in their daily
It's
interactions.
so interesting that you say that, because as you're saying this, I was thinking about death and birth, right? There's so much synergy between the two energy wise. And birth, they typically say kids are closer to the other realm. And perhaps that distance to the beginning and the end is where you get this kind of like closeness, or whatever it is, where, what stage we're in is a little bit further away from those
It's exactly
interaction.
like what you're saying. It's basically, I think, where your consciousness
Yeah.
is just merging. It's making this transition, and those exchanges are happening with other dimensions of reality, or however you want to define that. And it might be different for how people experience it. So based on that human's programming, they might have a certain religion, a certain culture. And so that might be how that fractal here perceives that transition. Oh, I'm going to heaven. I can see angels, or some people might see Buddha, so that's whatever's integrated into their programming. But I think how you said that the children come in, yes, definitely, they're still merged. And so they're still in this in-between state, transitioning into this lower dimension. But you can see that they're communicating. I mean, it's widely known. People have experienced with their kids when they were kids themselves. Videos online, there's so many viral videos of kids experiencing and communicating with their grandparents, or whatever, or seeing angels. And that's one thing when it comes to when you are a medium, right, or you're accessing a high level of ESP, you will experience interacting with children differently. And the children will, or the opposite, children will interact with you differently. I don't have any children yet myself, but a lot of my girlfriends do. And all of them will tell you, oh my gosh, they just act different around you. And I, for many years, never, oh yeah,
Different
never from them. So they stare at me weird. They'll like kind of look at me like this, and they'll usually do it above the head here. And when the children do that, that's because there's an angelic, well, you could say, let's just say angelic, but there's another interdimensional aspect that the child is interacting with. It's usually associated with
like you
angelic.
have a guardian angel above you, or some kind of like you're connected to the interdimensional being as a
Yeah.
medium. That
Because my channel, and probably because my chakra up here is more open, there's almost like this open channel or doorway, and the child can actually interact. And it happens a lot to me, and also through animals. Again, it's not because I'm special. It's just because I have active mediumship. So the channels are open with other dimensions, and children are the easiest way to tell. They will know when they're interacting with different adults who's maybe holding a certain vibration or not. So that's something I've experienced my whole life. So I can really confirm that what you were saying, I definitely support the accuracy of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, I've also been fascinated with children connecting with their past lives, and they're able to like. Have you ever heard these stories where they're like, I know the exact house number from a different country, And like it was the house numbers 38, for example. And they were able to trace down this same first name and last name. And they're like, it's impossible that this kid from Iowa would know this thing from the UK. And, they're able to recite all of these things. So past life is something I love to talk about, but this is the next question, which is the burning question. What happens after death? Can you tell me a little bit more? And we'll talk about near-death experience as well. And this really is to bring awareness and just knowledge, from your point of view.
Well, I mean, in relation to past lives, I can explain a lot into that because that's part of what I do. But what happens after death? I haven't passed away in this reality yet. So I cannot 100% tell you, and anyone who tells you they 100% know, they're lying. Okay. Or they're lying to themselves, or they're a little bit delusional about that. They'll have a good idea, perhaps, and they might be more accurate, but no one 100% knows anything, right? You still have some level of programming that's influencing it. But from what I'm aware of, and someone who supports the simulation in the holographic universe, is that, okay, your physical body expires. That's what happens on a physical level.
So I like the way that you said that, expires. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It literally expires.
Cells die. Yep. All of the things just no longer cease to work.
Yes. So for me to continue answering this, I'm going to have to go a little bit back into the construct of what this is, because you've got to understand the construct a little bit to understand what the next stage is going to be. And I think that's where people get stuck. Or even a lot of mediums who really have a high level mediumship, they might not necessarily be as aware in consciousness in that research. So they might not be able to connect those dots. So I want people to perhaps try to look at reality or this construct as being, again, multifaceted, multi-layered with different dimensions. But how do you as an individual fit into all of this, right? That's kind of the question you need to answer. So from my understanding of what I believe and what I've experienced, and it'll be different for other people, there is oversouls, right? And these are extensions of what source energy is. You know how we're talking about the original power source? We are literal fractal extensions of this energy source experiencing itself. Now, if we are fractals, how many fractals are there and how many dimensions are they running through? So the oversoul is, I would say, a larger fractal compared to this fractal here, or a more evolved state that's closer to the original power source vibrationally or through frequency. And it's fragmented through different space-time realities. How many, we don't know, right? How many levels, we don't know. But what you're experiencing here now, which is what really matters, is you're one fractal of that oversoul which has been fragmented. Now, this can touch a little bit on the past lives that we were talking about and why people can tap into other realities through memory of past lifetimes. And that's because that is not actually them. It's another fractal of them in another space-time reality, which technically still exists, just in a different resonating timeline. So that memory can still merge with the fractal here, because it's connected, right? It's from the same energy source, but at a much closer rate. So at a closer energy signature. So they can tap into it and still experience the memory. So if we go into it with this understanding that we are fractals of a fragmented oversoul, which is from an original power source of energy, then if we leave this reality and there's many other fractals and other timelines, then it's really impossible for us to actually die on an infinite level energetically, right? Because that energy source is still existing. The oversoul is still existing. So even if your physical body expires here, it must mean that it's just a transition, right? It means that.
So your fractals never cease to exist. It's just the human flesh that expires.
So
but the totality of that original power source, which we derive from, is staying intact.
Sort of. So you are generally correct with it, but I just want to correct that the fractal itself, it does still exist, but it's more like it's transitioned into a different state of its own evolution. So it's not necessarily in the same state, the fractal, right? Because it's constantly evolving or whether that's a contraction or an expansion, right? Like it's contracting and going into maybe a lower reality again, and then expanding and then ascending into a higher reality. Like that's a possibility. But the fractals don't ever stay in the exact same state, only in that timeline. And that's how mediums can contact the other side. Because if you look at it through an holographic reality, they're tapping into a fragment or a remnant of that energy signature of that fractal, which no longer exists in that point in time in the timeline, but it still exists in another point. So they kind of can bleed over. But again, to take it to the next level, it's like opening a computer file on a quantum computer and opening it and contacting that energy signature. So it still has remnants there within the quantum field of everything. That's what's actually happening. And I don't know anyone who's actually said that. It's just something that I started to realize the past few years.
You just blew my mind, and everything was resonating to a certain degree. No, genuinely. And I think, and maybe this is the reason why, sometimes you do a psychic reading, it's not always accurate when you look back, but certain things are accurate because it's so complex and interdimensional, as you said, that there's just so many different moving parts beyond the free will and the fate element. So I thought that was really interesting because when people have done psychic readings in the past, they've experienced reality coming true, but then it not coming true. And I don't think it's the expertise or the advancement of the psychic. This is my belief, and I'd love to hear what you think, it's just that the complexity of all of this interdimensional, simulation, the quantum science of it is so complex, and we're tapping into different timelines. We're tapping into so many different free will and destiny and other people participating in this whole simulation that it's almost impossible to predict. But I'm curious to hear what you think about this overall, medium and psychic industry even, right? And how that slight tangent, but like how this kind of works in the general vicinity.
I think anyone fully understands it, but I can share my perspectives on it. I think that people do experience it differently. I think that there's people who are experiencing different levels of it. Are there some fake people who are delusional and making it up? Yeah, I'm sure that there is. Do I think that there's people who are accurately tapping into accurate information of what this construct is and what the theory that we're just discussing? Yeah, absolutely. So I think that you only need a few people to be doing it ever on this planet or in history to be able to go, yeah, there's something to this. And they're tapping into something real. So, yeah, that's what for me, I'm like, I already know what I'm tapping into. Can I fully prove it to people? As a medium, you can't live your life like that. Or the world will crucify you. It doesn't matter what, because you're challenging challenging people's belief systems. So let them believe whatever they want. I know that I do client readings and I'm able to access information about them that's accurate. So, how do I know that? People that I don't know, how can I just randomly make that up? Clearly, I'm tapping into something.
100%. Do you think it's more accurate when you're reading like a past versus reading for the future?
Yes. So through my dowsing rods, what I basically do is, not many people are familiar with dowsing rods because there's not many advanced dowsers, especially online. There's really only a few girls that I've ever seen that do dowsing rods, and they have much bigger followings than me, but that's only because they started posting way before me. I have a very unique way of dowsing that I established myself, to be honest. I don't even watch any of their videos, so I don't copy anyone else's style. This is just something through my own integration and high self-integration that I just started to realize I could use. And it literally was me waking up one day and I just went, I remember how to use these. It was like a memory that I'd mastered already in another timeline.
For me, sampling so many dowsing rods, you are my favorite.
Thank you. I mean, I don't like to compare myself in the sense of I respect that everyone, is using through their own ability. So I'm never spread hate to other dowsing users or anything like that. We all have our own different styles. But yeah, my style is different. The time frame that I use them is really long compared to other dowsing users, and I'm very specific for using them in regards to investigative mediumship. Now, the reason I'm going into this is purely because I'm trying to state how I'm accessing the information. And what I do is it's basically like the beings that I speak to, right, that aren't in this dimension, they can help me access the files of individuals, right? Or the quantum field or the Akashic field that people will reference, the Hall of Records. Anytime anything happens throughout space-time reality, it doesn't disappear. It's there on some level within some frequency band of some timeline that almost goes into a quantum computer, and then you can extract that information, from that hard drive or whatever it is. And so
Yeah.
we can all do it without a tool. The dowsing rods can act as an extension of the individual or tarot or astrology or whatever to access coding on some level. Dowsing rods, I think, are cool because they show a physical response in this dimension, which is very unique because tarot and astrology are different. They work off different symbolism or mathematical systems, which aren't necessarily a physical response like dowsing rods or pendulums or Ouija boards. Ouija boards are not that different. I think Ouija boards have had a pretty bad rap throughout history. And they've been abused because everyone associates them with something evil. But they have to understand it's about the user. It's about the vibrational development and resonance of that user, what frequency they hold. Because if they don't know what they're doing, of course something might come in. And then because they don't understand it and there's a lack of awareness, they're automatically going to think it's something evil, but they might be tapping into a bleeding timeline. I've had clients, for example, where I've used the rods and they're like, was I haunted? Have I been haunted in a previous house that I lived in because I experienced this and that? And the rods are like, no. And I was like, okay, were they having some sort of paranormal or supernatural interaction? And it was like, yes. And they basically explained that it's like a bleeding of timelines. Something happens between realities. Sometimes there's remnants of those energy signatures which can still interact with family members or grids of houses. That's why they can interact through structures, or maybe someone died like several years ago and there's someone else new has moved in and there's some sort of residue of the energy. Those things happen, and I don't fully understand the science of it. Nobody completely does. But I just thought that was very important to highlight when we talk about accessing the future and accessing the past. So that accessing the past has happened, right? Or it's imprinted in that quantum field at a different level that's easier to extract. But when you go into future readings, and I have to tell people and clients all the time, I tell them, I cannot fully get 100% accuracy because it's not set in stone. Individual readings are not set in stone. Some people or some shamans, that they'll say destiny is 100% fate. For me personally, I don't think so. I think you have the ability to shift your timeline whenever you want. It happens all the time, but you have individual timeline and then you have larger collective timeline. Now, the collective timeline, that's much harder to shift, and that usually does have a certain fate or cycles that it has to go through for its evolution. So that's a little bit different. So yeah, a person might go, am I moving to this country? And the rods might say one swing, but that's because they're basing it on probability of the current vibrational trajectory of that current moment of that timeline. But that can shift again in a year's time. So it might swing one because it can't confirm, because it's like, yes, there's a high probability you can go there, but it doesn't mean that that's going to be fulfilled based on you. You might get sick. You might have a change of heart. You might get married and decide that you don't want to actually move over there. There's just so many different factors. And that's where the free will, that's why I wanted to bring it up, because it's a part of everything that we're discussing on some level.
This free will element, I think it's so fascinating. Do you think it's the same thing as jumping timelines and kind of like imagining the quantum fields so that you can imagine a reality that you can exist? And how does that play into part with like, well, let me back myself up a little bit. But yeah, just this question is really interesting to me because a lot of times, this has to do with birth and death. Sometimes you don't get to choose where you're birthed out of or the century that you're born from. And a lot of that to me is fate. But what you can do is within that construct of container, you can imagine and dream of different things and elevate. And that's to me free will. How do you differentiate these two in like what you can kind of create in the simulation?
It's a really good question. It's a multifaceted question. And there's another major element that contributes to all of this, which is what I believe or what I call karmic cycles. So karmic cycles are a whole other element that I'm still understanding. I don't think any of us, again, will fully understand it. It's extremely complex and goes through different dimensions and different fractals the karma can go into many different fractals, fractal timelines, and even your lineage and DNA and cellular structure. So it's like, seems to be some way that energy gets harnessed and circulates on some level. So that's the best I can probably do with that one. But that does impact timelines. It impacts how fast you can shift. If there's a karmic cycle that needs to be completed, well, it's going to have to be completed before you can potentially manifest a higher timeline for whatever reason of your evolution or whatever your agreement was before you came here or what you came to experience. Now, what your ego considers a higher timeline and what your soul considers a higher timeline is completely different. And that's something I think it's hard to understand that, because you could say, I want to manifest my highest timeline. I'm going to spend time focusing on this. And it might be, I want a successful career. I want a big house. I want 3 cars. And that's your ego though. So your soul might not give about any of that stuff. It might mean nothing, and that's not its own highest timeline. In fact, your soul might be like, okay, I'll let your ego think that's what it wants, so you can evolve and experience things or whatever.
Yeah.
But your soul might be like, I actually just want to live a simple life in the country. I want to work with animals. I want to appreciate nature. I want to give back. And so those timelines, that's how they fluctuate in different ways, I think, in a way that we don't quite understand. So the free will can determine, yes, the vibration that you tap into, but the foundation of shifting is not just the thought, intention, and action. It's the actual manifestation of the frequency and vibration that the fractal integrates and holds
Absolutely.
in that timeline or that reality for it to advance. So it's again a multifaceted manifestation, because you can't avoid the frequency and the vibrational part. That's the foundation. Everything else is like secondary.
So when you're talking about soul versus the ego, are they in fight of each other? And is that your higher conscious self with your spirit and guide? And there's also a guardian angel, right? And I'm curious how they play into that. Like, is it ultimately your mind/ego having the highest point of dictation of your life? Or there's that like overwhelming soul mission that, I'm curious to hear about?
Okay, so the ego and the soul are not the same thing, right? But they work in conjunction with each other. Anyone who tells you that the ego is evil doesn't understand what the ego is. Anyone who tries
I so agree with that. Yes.
Yes. Anyone who tries to kill the ego doesn't know what they're talking about, okay? As well as they think. Your ego is part of the human construct. You can't eliminate it. Stop trying to do that. You will actually cause conflict within your fractal here. So what you want to do is understand that there's unhealthy ego and healthy ego. And shifting your vibration and frequency is going to probably be more about, if you want to go expand, you want to honor the healthy the healthy ego. And you want to understand, okay, well, what role does this play? What does the ego play in the human construct, right? In this reality. And the role that it plays is identity. It is the unique identity that your fractal can experience here through its own unique lens for source to expand. So don't hate your ego. You should accept your ego, but you just need to know it's not your main navigational system. And that's what humans confuse. So that's why our world's so screwed up right now, because the ego has taken the forefront of holding the steering wheel, and it was never meant to do that. You need your ego to survive here, to have the human experience. You couldn't have the human experience. You need the ego to also know what you're worth in regards to, I'm being abused right now. This doesn't feel right. I deserve better. That's also an aspect of your ego, but healthy ego. Okay, so these all play a part in all of this, but they work in conjunction, but they're not the same thing. And to answer your question about spirit guides, guardian angels, they're not all the same. So look, there's going to be mediums that disagree with me, and that's totally fine. But from what I experience, ancestral connections, spirit guides, and angels are not exactly the same type of consciousness or relationship. So I would probably refer to ancestors being a different nature to spirit guides, in the way that spirit guides are more like ancient friends. That's what I like to call them. They're like your best friends.
Yeah, and the reason why I brought this up to tie back to Dead Serious is that, in the past I've experienced my ancestral trauma or legacy that's been so heavily imprinted, and I can feel it, that like the lineage within the women in my family are just so strong-willed, and it's almost like seared into my DNA in a sense. I don't know how to technically say that, and I feel like that's one way that I'm coping with the passing of my grandmother, right? In terms of grief, is that I feel like she lives within me and I still have her in me. I want to close out with two questions still around death, because everything that you talked about, Irena, has been so helpful just to kind of understand the construct of death, living, our soul, spirits, and how this kind of goes together, and bring ourselves like out of the perspective of the human flesh, right? So that like 30,000 point of view to me is really helpful to bring ourselves back. But I would love to zoom in, because we're still living in this human experience. And the number one question that people have is, okay, I'm so scared that my parents are going to pass away, right? So what is something that you would like to share with someone that is saying that they're terrified of death for themselves and for their loved ones, for their pets, and all of that? I know that we've talked about fractal, which is that 30,000 point of view, but zooming in to help them cope. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think it's important to do that. The more you expand, though, the more that everything I'm talking about is going to become your daily life, though, at the same time. So it won't be 30. Yeah.
100%, but there's still people that's just like, even me, right? I feel like I'm connected to everything that you're saying, but when it comes to that moment, I'm still probably going to have that like human experience of a feeling. So I'm just curious, for those people that might not be as in tune, like what do you do? What do you share on that note?
Yes, no, definitely. So I definitely want to answer this perspective to help people. All I can say is that what I said before in relation to the physical body expiring, that is what death is. That is just that. You are transitioning into some other aspect of your soul's journey. And even though you might be scared of death, it's not the end. It's just not the end. The only thing that fears death is the actual human ego. Your soul doesn't fear death. Your higher self doesn't fear death. It doesn't feel like it's not at home or it's missing anything. It is always present and always whole. It's only the lower aspect of the human here in a third dimensional reality that feels the fear of being disconnected from something ending, or holding an attachment to what this all is. Now, some people still might get angry at my response then, because it's still quite complex, but I can only fairly answer that question if I did mention those things out of respect for the soul and the sovereignty that person can reclaim. So that's why I started off with that. But I just want to say that the less you fear death and that transition, the more present you're going to be, and the more that you're going to be able to amplify the amazing, unique human experience here. So you can't live your whole life going, oh, it's going to end, it's going to end, it's going to end. That's basically like, I don't know, religions that promote an Armageddon that's going to happen and end it all, and that's the end of all space-time reality, and that's it, and it's just darkness forever. I just think that there's so much more out there. And I think consciousness supports that there's some sort of infinite expansion that is happening on a cosmic level. And you are part of that. And so you're not some tiny speck that's going to just disappear and that's it. Sure,
You're
maybe in
much
that
more.
reality, sorry, maybe in that reality, that's how you feel, but that's not the case. That's not the case at all. You are so much more than
That's
that.
beautiful. Yeah, that's beautiful. And what about like families, right? Like for them to experience loss, which is the absence of that person's laughter, smell, and all these memories that you are going to make. How can a family member best cope and adjacent to this whole thing? And I know that, sometimes people say that they get returned in birds and numbers and glitches and, lights and things like that.
Yes. So when you ask me about spirit guides, I really, really want to answer this, by the way. Spirit guides, the difference between them and ancestors is that ancestors or close relatives will often show up. They can show up on a more physical manifestation through animals, through music, through all these different types of symbolism that connect to you. So that is one way of identifying. That's the difference between more of an ancestral connection as opposed to a spirit guide. Spirit guide is a little bit more different, and your spirit guide goes beyond this fractal of your human relatives. It's something much more ancient and expanded than that. But I want to say that I have experienced grief, and that's why I really want to answer this, because I have lost my father. I lost my father 8 years ago, and it was really traumatic. He actually died in another country out on working on a project, and we had a very troubled relationship. I mean, we loved each other, but he was very absent. He really didn't know how to be a father. So there's all these sort of trauma or like voids within myself that hadn't been healed before his exit, and so many people can relate to this. So I didn't get to say goodbye. He died of a heart attack, right? Which I had already seen through my mediumship like 10 years before that. But he actually did die that way. He dropped dead of a heart attack in the shower. He was on project. He worked in the seismic oil industry, was out on a project in the middle of nowhere in like a country called Timor-Leste, which is above Australia. And
Wow.
so he was out in whoop whoop, would like, so to speak. And no one could get to him, basically. I think he had like house cleaners and that. And so they came and they discovered his body, and they just couldn't get the emergency flight to land on that island in time, because, when you do projects like that, you're sort of out in the bushlands or forest, doing excavation of minerals. And so anyway, I struggled with that. And I remember when I found out that he had died, I was so angry. I screamed. I was like, because I just was like, no, this is not how, no, I didn't get to say goodbye. There was so much I had to say. I was just so angry at the universe and just everything in this reality. And so, it took me a few years, but I will tell you something that really changed my perspective. So as a medium, you still experience grief, right? You still experience pain. And I think you have to go through that own evolution yourself to understand what this all is and how it works. Now, a few years after my dad died, like I struggled, like I would randomly cry. Again, so many people can relate to this. Crying, I could, like the thought of him anytime Father's Day came up, like I was just a mess, honestly. I had so much unhealed trauma that I hadn't faced yet, and that just all came out. But there was one evening where I had a really powerful spiritual experience, and I think people might find comfort, or maybe they've experienced this too. I was in my bedroom and I was watching like a movie of something that triggered some sort of deep emotion in relation to my father. And I'm pretty sure it was about this child who got to see his father who had died, and he'd come back for like 24 hours and he could interact with him. And then he had to leave. And oh my God, I just lost it when the kid had to say goodbye and he had to go back to whatever other heaven, whatever. And I just lost it. But it opened up a portal of emotion, which then allowed my mediumship it just kicked in, right? And I felt my father in the room. I felt him. Not like he was physically standing. I felt his spirit in the room, and he just started telepathically communicating to me. And he goes, "Why are you so sad?" He's like,
Yeah.
"I'm okay." You don't have to feel sad about any of this. Why are you still holding on to all of that grief? Yeah. And in that moment, I mean, I was hysterically crying, of course, but in that moment, I just went, I'm ready to let go. And some initiation happened with my higher self and whatever energies I'm connected with. And I made the conscious agreement to let the energy go. And you know what I was shown? I was literally shown in my whole abdomen, I saw purple energy, like a plasma, almost like a poison circulating in the abdomen region of my physical body, right? Like through my third eye, I could see it. And I was like, and it just showed me, you have to get it out now, get it out now. And I just felt it releasing out of my body, this purple like energy, like a poison that had been making me sick. And I had been very sick in that region. And I saw it come out. And then I was given these instructions it was like, go on the floor now. And I just did this work on my body where I was shifting energy and I had released it. And I knew that I had moved on to a new chapter and I'd actually shifted my frequency in that moment because I'd closed the door and I was like, I'm ready to heal. I don't have to hold on to that energy. So this is why grief is such an important emotion. And so many people get sick after they lose a loved one or they have some sort of experience like this. That's usually because there is something there in the body, some sort of energy. But as soon as you let that go, I swear to God, I had the best sleep at night because it was nighttime. I woke up the next day. I felt so good. I felt like I'd had a sickness actually removed from my body.
That is so powerful. Yeah.
And I never felt that sad again about my dad.
Okay. So for families who are listening, watching, for them to experience this, should they contact a medium or should they just say a certain mantra? Like, how can they get that out?
This is going to be definitely different for everyone and
So we have so many more burning questions. Thank you so much, Irena, for this episode recording. This is probably one of my favorites so far, but thank you so much for everything. If there's one last thing you want to say to the audience, please, one last word.
Death is not the end. There's so much more, and I'm happy to dive deep more into all of those possibilities of what all of this is and how we can embrace the transition next episode.
Great. And I will leave everything in the link below. Thank you so much again, Irena, for your time. I really appreciate you.